Welcome, everyone, to the Conscious Woman podcast. I am delighted to welcome our guest today, Neelam Jain, founder of PeriFerry, who's going to speak to us today about how we can all be consciously inclusive of the trans community. So, Neelam, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you so much, Bhavna. It is very exciting to be back as your ex fellow, as just another person who's known you and who's admired your work over the years. Thank you for having me. Really is an honor.
Thank you, Neelam. And yes, speaking of the fellowship, we first met in 2018 when we just launched the Lead Like a Girl Fellowship, which is our fellowship
Mhm.
program at Genomics for young women leaders. And I remember at the time you were very young. Of course, you're still very, very young. And I think at that time you may have been maybe just about 22 years old. You, I believe, had recently quit your cushy corporate job at Goldman Sachs and had just started Periphery.
Yeah.
And I remember when all of us were going through your application on the admissions committee, all of us were like jaw dropped when we were reading your application, and everyone I think had the same question, which is how is it that this young
Yeah.
woman has such clarity of purpose at such a young age? So I want to begin with that. How did you develop this clarity of purpose? What sparked this idea of wanting to help the trans community?
Yeah. No, I think I firstly want to say that the time when the fellowship sort of came was very difficult period for me, very honestly. Because you just when you're starting up, and especially when you're running a social startup or social enterprise, any social organization for that matter, the first couple of years are extremely challenging. And I still remember just being a part of that program really grounded me, and that sense of community that I got is something I don't just say for the sake of this podcast, but it's really helped me in that journey. And at that point in time, this is one of those things that really anchored me to, just connect with myself better. Because when you're facing adversity, it's very easy to kind of forget who you truly are and why you started to do what you do. So I just want to just plug in very shamelessly that this is a fellowship that I recommend young women, to really go for. And I think it can really do a lot of wonders for, if you're looking for something like this. Now, coming to the question that you've actually asked, which is about how do we really start this? And I would like to say that, this isn't something that I planned to do or I envisioned my entire life that I want to be in the social sector or that I want to, very mindfully work with and for the trans community. I would say this is just something that came along. I was with Goldman Sachs and, very nice job, amazing colleagues. And then along the way, found a group that was very consciously working for the welfare of the queer community, the larger LGBT community. And then I became an ally in that group. I just joined it. I was like, okay, let me try and do something outside of my daily work hours. That's how it really began. And little by little, I found a lot of interest. I met a lot of people from the queer community, especially a lot of trans folks who visited the campus, sharing their stories, etc. And from there on, I decided, okay, you know what? Let me take this even beyond my, office and my work circle. So I connected with them. I met some of the NGOs and CBOs that work in this space and truly identified that socioeconomic integration or livelihood creation was one of the massive challenges that the trans community was facing. And that's how the purpose and the vision of Periphery really began to serve as an organization that really helps create inclusive livelihood for the transgender community. It took me a year to actually come down and start, just start the organization itself. It's not like the idea came today and I quit my job tomorrow. None of that happens, right? It's something that you develop over time, and very consciously you think about it and then you make that jump. So I felt really lucky that I actually made that jump. And I've also had an extremely supportive network of friends and family who, sometimes came in as like advisors, sometimes came in as a colleague for a short period of time. And all of that really helped us build Periphery as the organization that it is. Yeah.
And what wonders you have done with this work, I have to say, it's truly amazing. Neelam, I also want to talk to you about courage, which is something I know we talk a lot about in the fellowship as well, because here you are. The work that you're doing is by no means easy. You're essentially trying to dismantle a social system of oppression against a community that has existed for years,
Yeah.
and shaking something up like that is I'm sure challenging on many levels. And when you first thought of this idea and you thought of taking those first few steps, I'm curious what gave you the courage to do that. And the reason why I ask is because I do come across many young women, women of all ages really, and of course men as well, who also have these ideas and hopes and dreams of doing something meaningful with their life, of making a difference. So that clarity of purpose may be there. But then at the same time, they also experience a lot of resistance. And that resistance can be inner or outer. Inner in terms of really self doubt and all those questions that come up for any of us when we're doing something new around, is this too big a challenge for me to take on? Am I the one to be taking on this challenge, and can I do this, and what if I don't succeed? And equally there can be external resistance as well, in terms of not having the right level of support from friends, from family, not having the resources to move forward with an idea. So I'm curious, what did you experience, any resistance, inner or outer, and what gave you the courage to move past that resistance?
Yeah, no, I have this really funny way of looking at it. I just feel like, in retrospect now, I just feel like the younger you are, the more foolish. And it's easier to take those sort of jumps. I can't imagine how easily I would have done that at the age of 30, versus doing that at 21, 22. I mean, I'm not saying that was the only age is the only factor, but I think that played a huge role for me. That at that age, I could kind of find something that was more interesting than my other job, that gave me a much more, deeper sense of direction of how I want to live and, sort of lead my life itself. And then, of course, the age of 22 makes you feel like anything is doable. You can achieve anything in this world. And like, I'll start this organization today and all the problems will end tomorrow. So when you go in with that kind of a very young, curious mind, you just feel like everything is doable. And honestly, that's the mindset with which I started the organization itself. But what gave me courage over the years is many things that came together. And I think one of the most important things, and maybe we don't talk about it often, is the kind of privilege that some of us as cisgender people hold in the society. And I think the courage also comes from having a lot of privilege in the society. Sometimes it's the privilege of a gender, sometimes it's the privilege of your economic situation. I mean, I don't have to go back and support my I didn't have to go back and support my family for the initial few years of my career. And that gave me a huge sort of a space to just go out there and explore myself. Courage also comes from the people who come together in fulfilling that purpose. As an individual today, I mean, we have a team of about 14 of us working full time in this organization. And even when I started, I did have a couple of people who really like backed up what we were doing. So I think all of that helps, and all of those are sort of external. But internally, for me, what really helped was I just believe that it is a problem that can be solved. And I had a very strong sense of, feeling about that. I truly believe that this isn't a problem that has no human control over. It's not something that I want to leave it to the god, saying, okay, whenever God wants to fix it, the god will fix it. I felt like it's very much something that another human being can be a part of the solution without really taking up the space. So even now when we do this work, we're very conscious that we're not taking the space of the queer community, but we're really just being a facilitator. We're really just supporting and helping the community achieve very meaningful livelihood and very sustainable livelihood at that. Yeah.
Awesome. So, Speaking of the trans community, just at the outset, so we're all on the same page, can you define for us in simple terms who is a trans person, and what are some of the biggest myths that you find still prevail that you can bust for us?
I think there's no one way to look at the trans community or trans people in general. I think in a country like India, especially, where we've sort of only seen the image of a trans person as someone who's on the streets, someone that we've seen at a wedding, sort of come and ask for arms and all of that. And while they do represent a part of the community, the trans community is a whole lot more diverse. There are trans men, there are trans women, there are gender non-conforming trans people, there are trans people who prefer the cultural group as their name, like for example, the Arvani group, the Jogapa as trans people, then we have the Hijra community, etc. There's no one way to really identify as a trans person, and I feel like the best way for us as allies to be inclusive is to really lean and understand from the community itself. And there's a whole lot of resources that are actually available online. I mean, if today someone tells me that hey, they don't know what it means to be a trans person, I'm just like, I think that's because you probably didn't take the step to actually learn and understand, because for all you know, just anybody in our family can also very well identify as a trans person. We usually think that identifying as trans is a very far away reality, that most of us have nothing to do with this. You never know if somebody from your own family can identify as queer and be closeted, for that matter, for probably their entire life as well. So it is very much a part of all of our lives itself. Yeah, that's how I see this. Yeah.
And I'm curious, Neelam, how you went about building trust with this community, because my guess is when you first started this work, you may have been seen as an outsider. So, how do you then build trust and credibility? And I think this is an important question for any entrepreneur or anyone who's trying to create a community and build that trust with that community. How does one do that? How did you
Yes.
do that?
I think we're still continuing to do that. And it's something that we try and live up to every single day that we're doing this work. But the initial years are, of course, a whole lot more challenging, because we're talking about a community that's been used and abused politically, socially, economically for decades together. And for them to trust anybody who is not a queer person or not a trans person is valid, and I think we should respect the fact, that that does happen. But as an organization, we were very conscious about the fact that we're here to serve and solve a very fixed problem. We weren't here for the flashy news. We weren't here for, okay, a young girl quit her job and started her organization. All of that sort of happened around us, but that wasn't what drove us. And that's what really helped us, because it took us an initial year to build that rapport, and that rapport and that trust is only by people seeing you do the work. It A couple of people that got placed in our first year and two, those people became our biggest champions and biggest allies of Periphery. And then they went back, spoke in their communities about not just the fact that they got the job, but also the kind of experience that they had with our team itself. And that's really what gave us inroads into communities across the country. I currently we're working with about 2,500 odd trans people across the country. We placed roughly about 350 people in different jobs across the country, right from organizations like Accenture, IBM, Walmart, JPM, Goldman Sachs, and not all of these people come from the same backgrounds, right from placing someone who's maybe just eighth dropout to people who have great education careers but have not been able to be themselves. We've really worked with a diverse set of community members, and the only thing I constantly hear from them is that they find our team to be genuine. They see the reason with which why we're working, and that's, I think, the only way in more technical sense that you can acquire a customer base per se. And I think the community has been very kind to us. And I've I have a lot of friends now from the community itself, and So yeah, that's just become a part of my life right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that purity of intention really matters. And I know you are absolutely genuine about this work. Speaking of these, so many now, as you mentioned, hundreds of individuals that you've helped over the years. Can you share with us, just to put a human face to these many stories? Can you share one or two stories of individuals who have benefited from your work? Stories, I'm sure that uplift you when times are tough. What are
Yeah.
one or two of these? Would love to hear.
Yeah. This is very, it's back in the day, and this is when we didn't have a much bigger team. It was just about two three of us working, so we would literally do everything end to end. And so one of those mornings I got a call because my number was up on Google, for any calls to periphery and stuff. I got those calls saying that I'm at the Chennai Central Railway Station. I'm a trans woman and I need help. And I said, okay, what you need and all of that. And she said that she's run away from home, her family doesn't accept her and things like that. So I said, okay, you know what, just let me know what time you're actually getting there and I'll come around and see you and stuff. So she said, meet me that morning. And my house is just about 5 minutes away. So I immediately took off, went to see her at the railway station. And by the time I reached there, her phone was switched off. I didn't know who this person was. And so I just went back home. The next morning, again, I got the call. And she said that she somehow managed to find a charger from one of the people at the railway station because she's run away from home without anything, nothing, no money in hand, maybe just a bag with something. And then the next morning we met her and we said, you know what, let's take this one thing at a time. You don't have a space to go, you can't be on the streets for now. And she said that her family, has been trying to push her into marriage and things like that, but she said that she can somehow still manage to stay with them for about 2 months maybe. So we said, okay, you know what, just go back to your house because you're saying that you can go back. And we met her, we took her application in, we understood what her background is. And then a month later, we called her and we told her that there's a training program happening in Bangalore that we'd like for her to join. So she came there for about 2 months. She was training with another 25 other trans people. And I think that in itself was a huge, experience for her in terms of what she felt, not just training on technical things, right? But just the sense of community and the sense of fellowship that she got over there. She was at the end of the program, she was one of the first people to get a technical job. She was placed in Accenture, continues to work there for the past, I think, 4 years now. She's had a promotion ever since. She's also gone back home in her true identity over the years, telling her family this is who she really is. And over the time, her family's also accepted her. So yeah, I mean, I think it's these things that we really, do this work for. And one of these times she also came back to our office. She offered us money saying that I've been getting these promotions and these hikes, can this money be of some use? We said, you know what, thank you for doing this, just pay it forward, support another trans person who comes your way, and just be their guide in their journey. So, and so many more people like that. Some of the people that we've placed in 2017, 18, they become managers and leaders in their teams. And that sense of feeling that we get, because their lives before wasn't really how they wanted it to be, and the life that they're living now gives them that self-esteem, that confidence, that societal recognition, and everything that they've been longing for. I mean, and I don't by any means say that job solves everything, but having stable financial income can solve a lot of issues in your life. And then dealing with a lot of other things like family acceptance becomes slightly easier as we go on that journey.
And speaking of what what kind of supportive ecosystem it really takes for trans persons to feel included, I'd love your thoughts on, especially within organizations, because I know you're doing incredible work in placing trans persons within organizations, getting them formal employment. What have you found in terms of what are what really helps? So what are some policies or practices that actually really make a difference when it comes to creating this inclusive, enabling environment for this community? And equally on the flip side, where do you think there's still scope for a lot of work to be done that we should be aware of?
It's a long list. It's a very
I'm
long list.
sure.
But let me just give you a couple of pointers over there, right? The most basic thing is to have an anti discrimination, have an anti harassment policy that is inclusive of all persons, and if it specifically calls out trans persons, gender non binary people, queer people, that helps because that shows the organization's commitment to supporting those who might be a lot more marginalized than the others. A lot of trans people seek support for medically transitioning, although it's not a mandate to do so, but a lot of them might require that support. And this can be, one of those insurance policies, medical healthcare policies that organizations can and should provide. And we see a lot of organizations do that. And all of this also in turn helps the organization, retain, create that sustainability and build a far more inclusive work culture itself. So supporting trans people when they're going through their gender affirmation surgery processes, when they're on their HRTs, either through financial means or through financial and other, workplace support means itself. Inclusive restrooms matter a lot. Having said that, we're not going to compel trans people saying that, oh, now that we have a gender neutral washroom, you should use only that. That's not the idea of it. You let the person, choose the washroom. We don't ask any new person joining, hey, which washroom would you use? You just give them the options, right? And a person will use what's in accordance with their own gender identity or their expression and what feels the most safest to them itself. So having a gender neutral washroom is great. It really does create that sense of support, even without saying a lot. Just visually seeing that can make a lot of difference itself. And I think beyond all of these things that organizations can do, what I've learned over the years is that it's also sort of easy to maybe place a trans person in the organization who's out and proud and stuff. What's important is that are we creating enough and more of a success for them? If you're trying to have a trans person who didn't have as much exposure and as much of a career, they didn't graduate from a tier 1 or a tier 2 kind of a institute, and you're trying having them compete with the IIM and the IIT folks, how are you setting them up for success? So really building on their success over the years, being that coach, being that buddy, that mentor in the organization, having a career progression program for the community really matters a lot, because that's what speaks of the organization's success over the years. And really standing up against people, even if they're your top performers, and if you know that they're a bully, if they're engaging in homophobic, transphobic instances, and actually showing them the door is important. It's not just enough if you do things for the community. You also, as an organization, have to show that you don't stand, you will stand up to any sort of phobic instances that may happen at a workspace.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, one of the things I know, like for example, in our work with women and gender discrimination, one of the things we find is you can have all of the right policies in place, but if at the level of everyday micro interactions, you're not creating that sense of inclusion for them, it's for the long term, it's not going to be impactful. And in fact, with women, we know a lot of them, one of the reasons why they leave organizations is because of this accumulation of micro inequities or aggressions over time. I imagine the same is true for the trans community as well. For example, if you stare at someone for a second longer, that's actually an act of microaggression, or you use the wrong pronoun or not use the right pronoun. So I'm curious, what are some of these microaggressions that we should be mindful of? And equally on the flip side, because just like aggressions add up over time, also these small acts of inclusion add up over time. So um, for someone who's looking to be a better ally, what are these acts of inclusion we can consciously engage in? So let's begin first with microaggressions, and then we'll move on to how we can be better allies.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of them, and this is from cumulative thoughts of a lot of people that we engage with. We also do like a post placement process, so we try and understand how they're actually being integrated into the workspace and if they're having any issues. One of the most common things that we used to hear a lot, especially in our initial years, was that while they were professionally accepted, you know, they still wouldn't have a group of people to go with for lunch. And i and that's not something you can force anyone to do, right? But then why is that happening? And why is that happening to so many of the people that we're placing, that the same colleague who is great to them at work sits with them and does the work and is acting in a professional conduct, but the moment they have to step outside the premises or the moment that they have to go to another floor, they prefer not being seen with this trans person. And that really shows a kind of, reservations that people have with trans folks. And that kind of then amplifies that, maybe the organization's not done a good job at actually creating that sensitivity and that sense of genuine inclusion itself. Another thing that you yourself said was pronouns. I still have a lot of people who ask me that, hey, isn't it obvious that you look at me and you know what my pronouns are? I said, no, it's not obvious, because a lot of people, their pronouns might not be in the stereotypical sense of, okay, you look like a stereotypical woman, so your pronouns should be she, her. That's really not the case. And a lot of times, writing the pronouns in our signature or somewhere else is not just about me, it's also about showing a sense of allyship with the larger queer community itself. So, really asking people for their pronouns. If you're meeting someone new, it's like fairly simple. You just introduce yourself saying, hi, my name's Neelam. I go by the pronoun she, her. What about you? Those simple, acts can really help as well. I'm sorry, I switched it. You asked me to talk about microaggressions first. I think see this in a lot in career progression of people, honestly. And I think that becomes a huge deal breaker in organizations, because a lot of times people are also seen comfortable with having trans persons at junior levels. But the moment you see a trans person in the sense of authority, a lot of cis people start to feel insecure. And that insecurity is not because of the trans person, it's largely because of, as cis members in this society, where we feel like this is not their space. We feel like this is not where they belong. So, and then we kind of show that in different ways and forms. We show that by not, respecting them or not really being a good team to the manager itself. That comes out in different ways, and we've seen managers actually having a lot of problem as they're growing in their success and if they identify as trans. So those are some of the things that just really come to my mind right away.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, there's so many things that we need to be mindful of in terms of how can we consciously create this
Yeah.
inclusive and enabling environment and be better allies. Neelam, what would you say? Because now you've been doing this work for, I'm guessing, 4, 5 plus years.
I think, yeah.
Five. That's
Yeah.
incredible. Looking back now, what would you say have been some of the biggest learnings that have come out of doing
Yeah.
this work?
Again, a long list, but let me give you one or two that really resonate with me. And I think it also comes, probably maybe if I was a bit older, I'd have known that. One of my biggest learnings after the initial few years was that I really thought that this is something I can do alone. Like, by alone, I mean Periphery alone as an organization can really solve this problem. And that sense of ego, or that sense of, yeah, I mean, whatever you call it, realized a bit late that a work like this, or for a lot of the things that we do, you really need to work in partnership with a lot of other organizations that work in this space. And that sense of respect for older people who've been in this space is very important. I've learned so much from them in my last 2 3 years, because I've engaged with them a lot more now than I did in my initial formative years of Periphery. So that's my biggest learning, that really connect with people in your space who are working in this area, build very meaningful as well as strategic relationships with other organizations that work in this space, because the LGBTQ community has been supported by hundreds and thousands of organizations in the country for the past 30 40 years. So for any new organization to come into the space and maybe just try and do the same thing again doesn't make sense. So really connect with people is important, and you'll get a lot more friends than you thought you would. That's my number one. And I think number two for me is definitely the kind of team you build. And this team sort of has to find you as opposed to you finding them. I've realized that in my 5 years of trying to headhunt the best kind of people, the people who've actually retained, the people who've actually continued to work and really contribute to the organizations are the ones who found me or found Periphery. And then they said, okay, I want to apply to this organization. So, as an entrepreneur, as an organization, just make yourself visible, just put yourself out there, and the right people who want to connect with you, who believe in what you do, will automatically come to you. I don't think it's possible to go around finding such people. Yeah.
Yeah, having a great team definitely helps. Neelam, what keeps you going on your toughest days? Because I imagine there are times when I'm sure things are not as rosy. What for you as an individual are either some practices or some things you do or say to yourself build that resilience to keep going because you're in this for the long haul. So how do you build that resilience?
I have very unhealthy ways of coping with stress. So I don't know if that's going to help. I mean, it's just a lot of different things. I mean, sometimes it's just sugar. Sometimes I mean, those things aside, I think what has helped me a lot is I am someone who's slightly spiritual and I'm religious as well. So that for me really forms as my anchor, especially during very difficult times. I don't know. I mean, and this isn't the most, what do I say? This isn't the most, a thing that's held by a lot in the masses, but I do feel like connecting with my inner self happens through a channel of spirituality. So that has kept me going over the years. And over the past 2 years, I've really started focusing on my health, which I did neglect for a very long time. And I would work crazy hours. I would work for like 12, 14, 16 hours, take breaks whenever I feel like, wake up late, sleep in very, very late, and all sorts of unhealthy practices that I've done. I still kind of go back to that, time to time, but then it's easier for me to now work around it. Maybe a day in a week is like that right now, but then back then I would spend 6 days in a week just having, constant work stress and stuff. So focusing on my health has really helped me. I've constantly chosen sports because as a person I've realized that's what really helps me, and I'm sure all of us know what helps us. Maybe for us, some of us it's to friends, other things, but for me on my most difficult days I play a game of tennis and I automatically feel better. I also lean a lot into yoga and that's helped me really focus on day-to-day activities as well. And yeah, apart from that, every now and then sugar junk also helps me. But yeah, that's really about it. And I think as you keep doing the work that you're doing, right, one thing that happens for sure is even if your problems don't reduce or the magnitude of the problems don't reduce, you become a lot more tougher. You become a lot more, conscious about how to solve them as opposed to taking every small problem as, oh my God, this is the end of it. So we're past that stage now, and we look at problems as problems, not as something that affects me as a person. Yeah.
And I think yeah, that is the beauty of being on a constant path of personal growth and this personal evolution, because then you start to, as you said, you start to approach the same problems through a different, expanded, more empowered lens. As someone said, if you're dealing with a, let's say, a level 7 problem, question to ask is how do you rise to become a level 8 person or a level 9 person, so it feels more approachable. Lovely. What is the next big challenge you are going after, or what is that next thing you're looking forward to? And how can anyone who is listening to this and wants to support your work and be an ally, how can they support?
Yeah, so as an organization, the next big aim for us is to set up more of the Transin centers that we have already. So, for those of you who are listening and maybe don't know what Transin is, it's TRANS, trans, and INN in. It's a safe space for members of the transgender community to come together and access shelter as well as livelihood support. So we started this in 2021 with ANZ as our lead sponsor. And we have one such center that has been put up in Bangalore. And through that one facility, we're supporting over 150 trans people every year. But we know that the demand from the community is a whole lot more. We know that the need of such spaces is a lot more, because a place like Transin doesn't just provide shelter, but it's also creating sustainable livelihoods. We're training people, we're aligning them to jobs, we're aligning them to entrepreneurial efforts, etc. as well. So we're really helping people become their, most financially stable version itself. So having more such facilities across the country is what we're looking to do. And for those listening in, if you do have the capacity, because I think the kind of CSR spend that we have in this area is still nothing. It's just barely anything. We still see a lot of organizations, and I don't mean any offense, but we still see organizations really only invest in the traditional areas of education or child development, etc., because those are seen as safer areas of contributing to organizations that are maybe 30, 40 years old, right? But I think we also need to, as CSR folks, as people who are in the DNI space, ask ourselves that DNI is not just a company problem. It's first a social problem, right? It's a much more bigger societal problem, and then companies are a part of that society. So if you're not contributing to the larger social change, then how are you really advocating for DNI is a question that we need to have organizations answer and ask themselves. So really investing in the space is what we're looking out for. And for organizations that want to do meaningful work in this space, I think they shouldn't just look at it from the approach of, okay, I want to hire trans people, make my workplace inclusive, create jobs, right? That's great. That's an impact you're making. But like I said, the community lives beyond these workspaces. What impact are you making in the society will actually stand as a testimony many, many, many years later.
Yes, absolutely, and that is the way forward. I think research shows this as well. People want to be part of organizations that are genuine and mindful of their responsibility to a wider set of stakeholders, not just shareholders, but the responsibility they have to the communities that they are a part of. So yes, this is absolutely core to that. Neelam, my last question to you. For us, living and leading consciously, a big part of that is also being conscious about what are the values that you choose to express on a daily basis through your work, how you show up day to day. I'd love to know what are those core values for you that are just central to who you are as an individual.
I think the biggest for me is integrity,
Mm.
and something that I will always hold myself up to, hold my team to, and also the people that we engage with. I think without integrity, everything that we do means nothing. So that for me is my biggest value system that I function with. Another thing for me is just how dependent can I be on someone, or how dependent can someone else be on me. It's as a part of this problem that we're solving, it sometimes becomes too much about that one person who's running it, or it becomes too much about that one organization. But can we act as a support? Can we, the learnings that we have, the mechanisms that we build, can Periphery as an organization scale that learning to maybe another 100 NGOs that work in this space but don't have the kind of privilege and access that we do? So how dependable are we is something that I try and function with. I really haven't thought of what values that I really function with otherwise, but these are things that I just generally do, and I think those add to my biggest value system. And finally, I think if this counts, is I hold my family and my loved ones very, very close. And all said and done, this is work. At the end of the day, this is a problem we're solving. And I'll be very happy if, as an organization, we don't have to do this 10 years from now, and if we are actually able to solve this problem. So throughout that entire journey, whether the work remains or not, I'll have my family, I'll have my loved ones. Is how I see, and I really hold them as, value or a family system that I function in.
Beautiful. Thank you, Neelam. And I second you. Let's hope we can all work towards a world where this work is no longer needed, because we've all consciously stepped up to create that inclusive environment and become better allies to one another. Neelam, thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing. All the best as you continue to do more great work. And thank you for being such a great role model also for young women everywhere. I know a lot of people look up to you and derive a lot of inspiration
Thank you,
and
Bhavna.
you.
Thank you so much for having me. Absolutely a pleasure, and just big fan of you, Bhavna. So I'm just happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.